Hey, sports fans! Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown live show every Monday, focusing on Winning Time, the HBO episodic show based on the Lakers' rise in the 80s with Magic Johnson. And as always, I am joined by Roland Lazenby, a good friend of mine, who is a best-selling author. He's written an incredible book called Michael Jordan, The Life. And if you want to know about Michael Jordan's life, this is the book that you want to study. He also has one called Jerry West, The Life and Legend of a Basketball Icon. Plus, he's in the middle of doing one on Magic Johnson. So I can not pick anybody more suitable to join me for these shows than Roland. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Coach.
Well, anytime we get a chance to interact and talk is a good day for me. And we certainly have a lot of things to go over with last night's show. How about quick impressions overall?
The same usual thing. There are little bits of little threads of truth. Most of the negative things seem to be aimed at Jerry West. They go out of their way to make him look bad. But there are a lot of people addressing that. Arn Tellem, Jerry West's long-term friend. And by the way, Arn Tellem and Jerry West worked very hard behind the scenes to bring Kobe to the Lakers. And I think that probably would say a lot to a younger generation of fans.
For sure. And he seemed really upset in an article recently that they're portraying Jerry in a kind of a crazy way. And, the thing is, if you were doing this, if they produced the first two and then all of a sudden they got the reaction, you might see perhaps the writers adjust how they do this. But these are all in the can, done way ahead of time. So there isn't going to be any changing of that. Like, for instance, I can remember like the show Lost. They were monitoring the social media, which had just come out in the beginning, and they were, adjusting based on what people reacted to. So that'll probably be the future of every broadcast. But nonetheless, there's more to be thrown out. They were throwing some haymakers here, and it wasn't just Jerry West in this episode. Did you know Chick Hearn?
Yes.
So is Chick Hearn this homophobic, racist, awful person, hanging around making coffee and getting drinks for people in the office?
No, I was talking to Lon Rosen, Magic's agent, this morning. And he, it's not just Lon Rosen. There's a whole network of former Laker employees, people associated with this that are like, whoa, they're taking people who are deceased, who can't defend themselves. Adam McKay, the director of this, is a very, very talented man. And he has knocked it out of the park with Succession. He is at the top of the business. He has immense power. He's had immense success. And sometimes when you're in a situation like that, where they give you what you want and you have all this power, you lose perspective. And I just can't imagine that this serves anything other than, I guess, HBO and just being able to do all this to legends. Now, I try to write the truth about people. I try to portray them as they are. And that can be hard, but this is not that. This is just taking people and destroying reputations, people living and dead.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. The first episode the first one or two where we're in the office and Chick is there, and he did a number of different things in the beginning. I guess he was also the PR guy or something, and doing the.
He was the general manager of the Lakers while being the broadcaster, and a lot of people don't realize that for years, for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, he was the GM of the Lakers and broadcasting the games too.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading one of those books. I absorbed every book I could about the Lakers growing up. I remember that where he was probably even in charge of travel way back in the day in the 60s before.
Right. The trainer does travel for most teams today, but he was the travel secretary. Probably Jerry West had those duties for a while too.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the crazy thing. Jerry West, they have this like Jerry West is some big executive in an office. He and Jack Curran, the trainer, and Paul Westhead, the assistant coach, when Showtime started, they all shared an office that was a converted broom closet. Think of that. It
Yeah.
had no windows. They made no effort to attempt to, because I think that's fascinating that they're in a, if I'm doing a TV show and you got a guy like Jerry West working out of a broom closet, I think that's funny. And he's got the trainer in it because the trainer's busy.
Mhm.
It's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, you could have done a lot of fun stuff where, like, he's trying to work at his desk and they're hitting him in the head as they're trying to move in some equipment or whatever, and there's no room. And I mean, I think that now that broom closet was in the Forum, right? That's where their offices were.
Yes.
Because I think that's interesting too. Is when they built the Forum, I'm sure they never conceived of having offices in there to house these people. So like nowadays they built out a whole complex generally in those situations, or they find somewhere else.
Nowadays, teams have hundreds of employees, just the ticket sales and marketing people. Back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, they might have 10 or 12 employees.
Now,
And a guy like Red Auerbach with the Celtics, they didn't even have assistant coaches in the NBA until Casey Jones, the former Celtic, became an assistant to Bill Sharman with the Lakers in the early 1970s. No team could afford an assistant coach before that.
wow. Well, the funny thing is that for how bitter rivals the Lakers and Celtics were during that time, Bill Sharman being part of that, and then Casey Jones of all people to come and be an assistant for the Lakers, I think was. I mean, I don't know what the equivalent is now. It's not as they don't have the rivalries like they used to, but I guess it'd be.
Oh, they had the rivalry back then was worse because the Lakers and Celtics would play like a 10-game series in the preseason.
Oh wow.
And they would be in touring cars. It would either be in New England or Southern California. They'd be playing at high schools. And then when the league in the 60s had 8 to 10 teams at times, they would have to play each other 10 times a season. And those guys, that all adds to this bitterness for Jerry West being on the losing end of all those championships. And the number one reason they lost, Bill Russell was a revolution at the center position. They talk about rim protectors today, of course. Bill Russell was a rim owner.
All right, great characterization of that. So we have a couple of questions. Interestingly, I want to throw out, like Ricky was talking about Adam McKay being a casual fan. Here's the thing. He did a fantastic podcast series about the NBA and during the drug addle right around this time, and sort of a deep dive into how they cleaned it up, quote unquote, to make it a more palatable product for the masses. So Adam McKay is the guy who really knows this genre. Right, and he knows what this world is about in the basketball world. I think that he's simply chosen, and the writers and stuff, chosen to simply create as much. We talked about this last week, as much conflict as possible. Somehow, in those writing classes you take, they always preach conflict. That's how you get drama and how you get momentum and all these things. So I feel like this is what they decided to do. They're like, how can we create even more than actually existed? And that's what we have.
And that drives not just film, that drives all of our media. I in addition to having been a reporter for a good long time, I taught college journalism for 21 years. And you teach the news values. And one of the top news values is conflict. Mm-hmm. And conflict, since the days when the Greeks first started putting on plays, conflict was the thing that drove drama. I don't mind any of that. And Adam McKay has done a wonderful job with fictionalized stories, but to come in and take this setting and to do that, well, the viewers, some love it, some don't. They decide for themselves.
For sure. Well, I thought that this episode might have been the most accurate, quote unquote, of all of them,
No,
which is, not saying a ton, right? Because the first two were not accurate hardly at all. But the Chick Hearn thing, let's just put a button on that one. So you knew him. I certainly knew of him and what his standing in the community was like. It was just strange because, we'll have to just say, like, we can quote what he was saying. He accused Pat Riley of having a faggy voice.
that never happened.
Never happened, right? And by the way, Pat Riley just simply, I don't even know what a faggy voice means, but he had a good voice. I think he was a very good color commentator, wasn't he? And that's an interesting
Who,
question.
Pat Riley?
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand, Chick Hearn was a locomotive, and Chick Hearn sucked up all the broadcast time. The great broadcaster who worked with him, they let him go. And it's I've written in my books, but I have to go back and look. He was a young guy working with Chick Hearn, and he was allowed to say a little bit at halftime. He could read the box score at halftime, but Chick didn't like the way he was reading the box score, so they cut him loose. And over time, Chick slowly learned. Chick believed, and he told me this, that basketball broadcasting was a one-man thing. You couldn't do it in a two-man booth. Of course, we do it with multiple perspectives today. But back then, Chick Hearn was, like I said, he was one of about 12, 15 employees for the Lakers, and he was doing everything. And so he was in control. And Jack Kent Cook, who owned the team, of course, before Jerry Buss, used to laugh about how hard when they would try to put a broadcast partner with Chick, how crazy it would get. And that's I have pages of notes here. I apologize. And I wanted to mention that with Chick. The last thing is Lon Rosen said today, and Lon worked for he's Magic Johnson's agent, but he was working for the Lakers then. He was first an intern and then became their director of promotions. He said the last thing Chick Hearn was a racist in any form.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. I mean, it would be hard to imagine because I feel like there are instances in my brain somewhere where, he actually stood up for integration, and he stood for having a league that represented, the best of who could play, not just white players, for instance, which is the era that he came out of from Minneapolis, which I think, we don't talk too much about. And when you talk about the history of the NBA, so that was good to hear. And then
he also implied that about Jerry West too. And Jerry West, the Lakers. There were a lot of guys in management, teams, owners, who were, the NBA had a racial code for the longest time, only one or two black guys per team.
Mm-hmm.
That was nothing to do with Jerry West. The Lakers were largely just about an all-black team for years. Now, they would have a player. It wasn't because he was going out specifically looking for a white player. Jerry West, he didn't care about a thing but winning.
Right.
And he really was very dedicated to scouting. He really cared very deeply about that. And he could get angry and be explosive at times, but he was really just kind of this quiet, very polite guy.
Absolutely. Well, we have, the opening scene, having gone through the slander of Jerry West for the first two episodes, is him on his knees begging. I guess it's not even clear what he's begging for. He doesn't want to be the coach. He's like, so I'm quitting that. But it seems like he still wants to be part of this, and they have to set it up for eventually he does take over for Bill Sharman as the GM. I don't think I'm spoiling anything there.
But that's all a lie. He didn't quit coaching before the season. He told management back during the previous season he almost quit one night in Boston that previous spring. After a game, he was so pissed off at how his team played. But more than that, he was angry with himself. because he had all of this emotion. And he said, and he told me this personally, he said, I was not a good coach. That was not a good period in my life. He was going through a divorce. He had a lot of personal issues. And he also was in a position, as Ron Carter explained to me, who was coached by Jerry with Norm Nixon. He was also coaching some guys that were his former uh, teammates or guys that he had played against in the league. And that's always a really tough thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, in the comments, I see an interesting question about maybe suing. Ricky was asking, like, if one of these people could sue. Now, I have to imagine the big thing in the beginning and the big thing at the end, and the text on screen that says that they dramatize these things must have been how the lawyers decided to make themselves impervious from any kind of a lawsuit. You're probably familiar with that kind of thing too, writing your books.
Yeah, Jerry West is a public figure. Sometimes, let's say you have a famous player, and this is an example that is how this works. And the famous player's mother has never made an attempt to be a public figure. Well, the law looks at her with a different set of protections. On the other hand, if I'm a writer publishing books, or I'm somebody running for Congress or the mayor's office, I'm seeking to profit from a public profile. And so the law treats me differently in terms of libel. And so they know, people who create media know, first of all, you can't libel a dead man. And so they've taken a lot of shots at deceased people. And this is really low to do. But that is the truth. The second thing is, a public figure really has a hard time. It has been done, obviously, with things like the tabloids. The tabloids have been sued by certain figures, and big settlements have been achieved. And this is almost like an HBO version of a tabloid.
Interesting. Well,
But none of this stuff with West. Oh, Jerry Buss had incredible respect for Jerry West's opinion. And, Jerry Buss was a new owner coming to this team. Now, he eventually, had conflict 15, 20 years later with Jerry West. But by and large, he was in awe of Jerry West. And every time something would come up, he would turn and want Jerry West to coach. He depended heavily on Jerry West's opinion of things. And their relationship was nothing like it's being portrayed here. None of this stuff ever happened.
Right. Well, before we get to the coaching search, which is another interesting part of the show last night, I want to talk a little bit about the filming of it itself, because there's some interesting things. There's at least 4 different looks that they are using when they are editing this thing together. One is a crystal clear, film look today. One is a 70s grainy look. Another one is a 16 millimeter sort of attempt with a sprocket hole on the left side, which would not look that way if it really was a 16 millimeter. At least the sprocket hole would be moving up and down very quickly on the left side. It's very strange. And then they also have VHS. Have you noticed this? That they switch in between scenes, in between cuts, from one of these looks to the other. And I'm kind of curious, maybe people in the comments too, if they've noticed this and seen it. I've been trying to pull apart because obviously when you make a cut to something else and you have a different look to the whole shot, you go from 70s grain to VHS look. There's got to be a reason for that. You don't just do it completely randomly. But have you been aware that they're doing this while they're editing this thing together?
Yes, of course. And there are 2 things about it that are diametrically opposite. Number one, it's a fascinating way to tell the story. It brings a sort of an authentic feel from the 70s, but also all kinds of other stuff. Sometimes it can be a little jumbled, but what the hell? They're out there breaking rules of all kinds as they do this. I mean, on every level. And so that part of it doesn't offend me. It's actually kind of fun, except for this. They will throw stuff in little quick flashes of somebody doing something, and they will use that to smear the person. And it will be you can go back and analyze these quick looks, and it's almost like it's just a very sudden flash to give you an idea without even giving you a moment to think about it. It's almost non-literal storytelling.
Hmm. You know,
And
yeah.
the way they used to sell Coca-Cola in the movie theaters, they just flash it at you. You wouldn't. All very subliminal, of course, is the word.
Yeah, and we saw that in Fight Club. They send that up too with what they. I don't know if you've never seen that movie, but they talk
Sure.
about it and they talk about how it's nefarious in a way when you do like one frame, you're not sure you saw it, but it hits you, and they've done the research. And yeah, I mean, listen, they had dogs doing it, after a cut in the first episode 2. It's a little heavy handed. Here's what I think they're doing though. I feel like when the character makes some sort of inner realization, and we see like Jerry West do it, we've seen Magic's mom do it, we see Magic do it. I almost need to pull it apart frame by frame to see, but in my mind, when they go to VHS, this is the moment when they use the VHS is when they want to say, okay, they're making some like my mother doesn't really love me, or man, my son is just a ne'er do well, or Jerry West is like, God, this is not. I'm not happy even though I won. I think that there's something there because there's got to be a method. As an editor, I know we don't. You don't. Everything's got to be motivated from something. So that's
This
my
is the
theory.
most insidious of it because they are using it at times. Now, obviously, Jerry West has spent a lot of he's miserable over his playing career.
Mhm.
And he has been miserable. It's not just with the Lakers losing championships. He took West Virginia. We're in Final Four. He took West Virginia in 1959 to the NCAA championship game. They lost by a point. And this is the great Jerry West. As he told me, he said, I had my hands on the ball. I couldn't, and I was crossing, the center line. I could not get the shot off in time. And he is tortured by this stuff. It is not his whole thing was he cared so deeply about winning. That's why he's the damn logo. That's why all of this stuff is important because there are these figures that we admire. They care on a deeper level. They make themselves crazy. They don't care. They'll do whatever they have to do. And there are a few of them, and they are very rare. uh, Jordan could could care about things that nobody else cared about. He came in as a rookie. He was embarrassing everybody. And it's not, there are a lot of guys, I don't say everyone, but there are any number of prospects who come in with the physical attributes of Michael Jordan, for example. But his ability to care on that deeper level, his ability to listen, and his personal integrity, each of these great players has a set of things. They're not all the same, but they are things that make them different. And Jerry West is one of those. He's the logo because he cared so deeply. A lot of people don't succeed because they have fear of failure. And these greats, they're fearless. They will go at it again and again and again.
Absolutely. Well, we have let's get to the Pat Riley part, the coaching search, because this is again a big part of it that people probably have a lot of questions about. Uh, poor Pat Riley, basically, right? Again, we're talking about character arcs, right? And you study this, and you have to have a discernible movement from one area of a person's life to the other. We can clearly follow that across episodes. So they make, Pat Riley. I mean, it was like Gunga Din. I mean, he's walking on the beach and looking like the saddest sack of all. His life is completely over, practically getting hit in the face on the basketball court playing pickup. Now, this actually might be relatively accurate. Would you say his
It
life?
is. That's Pat's own narrative.
Okay.
See, they're very good to certain people in this thing, and they enhance the narratives of certain people, and then they go after sort of. It seems to me their enemies, and they want to tear down the narratives of their enemies, the people behind this, and that it's Jerry Buss is beloved in L.A. He was not the good guy everybody thinks. When you go around, you have a street team to acquire 18, 19, 20-year-old girls, and you keep photo albums of them. You date them once or twice. You have a street team to acquire them. You have a bag man to pay them off. And for years, the media in LA gave him a pass on this. But if you wanted to make an ugly HBO series, and I'm not, I mean, Jerry Buss had many fine qualities. I'm not here to smear his name because he can't speak for himself, but he flaunted this openly and he loved to show them to reporters. All these books filled with these young girls. And obviously he's 45, early 40s when he gets the Lakers. 18, 19, 20-year-old girls aren't interested all that much in 45-year-old men unless they have a lot of cash and a lot of power. And so it is what it is. I mean, the idea is to try to just explain. My goal always in writing about anyone, we have so many fans, and I just like to try to tell the truth about the people involved. Then fans can make up their minds who they want to admire or what, because they spend hard-earned money to buy jackets or whatever they buy, books, trading cards, all of it. And I had a friend that went to a NHL game, and he just paid $130 for one nosebleed ticket recently. So this is a chunk of a fan's life. Not only that, it's a lot of heart and soul from a lot of fans. And so I think it's part of, I say this about Kobe. He never cheated the game. And that's why fans love him so much. He did not cheat anybody. It was all in. When I would hang out with Kobe as a young player, I was worried about him. He was so locked in. Mm-hmm. But to then come into that realm and to throw this kind of hoo-ha around, I don't want to turn this into what I did last week. I admit I'm embarrassed that I was so angry last week that I really sounded like an idiot. And of course, I am pretty much an idiot. But the point in all this is the Lakers are an important thing. They're a basketball team, but they are a community. And you know this as well as anyone, Coach. You have built a wonderful community here. I'm not stating anything that isn't fact. And you have made this the community. Well, the Lakers are a shared value system. They really are. And it is, it's a special thing. So I am offended by, plus the story itself is remarkable.
Right. No need to do what they're doing, but there's a question in the comments about the X's and O's of Showtime, and I went through last week looking at some full games from that time. It's hard to find games from Magic's rookie year. There seem to be more that are like 81, 82, which is fine because it's the same style, same personnel pretty much. And so I'll throw it out there, like as far as what the X's and O's were, and you hear. What's interesting is we see a scene where Jerry West, which may or may not be true, decides to go through Jack McKinney's, the Portland Trailblazers footage where Jack McKinney was an assistant. I'm a little bit dubious where they were saying that McKinney sort of designed all the X's and O's for Jack Ramsey.
No way.
Yeah,
and that's not the fact. The reason they were interested in McKinney is that he was an assistant coach in Milwaukee. And he was a guy who got along with Kareem, and he made a lot of sense to Kareem. And Kareem was the bread and butter of the Lakers. Everybody was up in arms because when they got Kareem, they didn't win, but they lost Kermit Washington, their power forward, and it took them a while. When Magic came in, not only was Magic playing as a forward, but they had Jim Jones and Spencer Haywood. They got Kareem, all this help for Showtime. But it's like in all my interviews, let's be clear, the teams that faced the Lakers through that era, they were all over trying to figure out what to do about Kareem.
Mm-hmm.
They were not scheming so much. I mean, they would, but I mean, they had to do their main scheming for Kareem. He was the weapon. Now, didn't even, and Magic didn't even think of himself as a point guard fully. He wasn't sure where he would play. No one was. And that's why all of the brain trust around the NBA, including, as I said last time, Dr. Jack Ramsey, they didn't believe he could be a point guard. Jerry West wasn't some maniac in that decision. He was just being as honest as he could be. And I have run into, I mean, that was the thing. Now, these two owners, but particularly Jack Kent Cooke, they don't know beans about basketball. And Jerry Buss is being portrayed as this guy who, is demanding this. He didn't know crap about it. As Jeannie, his daughter, told me, if the Rams had been available, he'd have bought the Rams. He'd have bought whatever he could. He wanted a sports team. It just happened that he was renting he had a tennis franchise. World Team Tennis, and he was doing business. He eventually came over and pulled his tennis franchise into Jack Kent Cooke's building. And Jack Kent Cooke, this incredible bastard of pro sports, was a mentor to Jerry Buss. And they talked 4 or 5 years. And it was sort of a mind game that Jack Kent Cooke was playing with this young real estate developer and money guy, Jerry Buss. It's none of this it's not how, and all of this stuff we see this week about the meetings and stuff, that's aren't the people in the meetings. And as fabulous as some of these minor characters are, they didn't have any of the power that's being alleged for them. And Jeannie Buss was a non-factor. She was her father's daughter, but she was going to USC. I said this last week. She eventually married a volleyball player. She wasn't there making those kinds of decisions. And she has very little memory of anything to do with the Lakers from that era on the floor. She has other memories that are very powerful and important. But all of this is really weird, the way they're putting the screws to Jerry West.
Right. Well, so talking about the X's and O's and what the team actually looked like. So, when Magic gets there and they have Norm Nixon as well, which becomes a problem. But we have a running team. McKinney comes in, and so there's a lot of fast breaking, that's true, and the pace is very high. And if they don't get the fast break, which, still only happen 20 or 30 times in a game, the other 60 possessions, they would set it up and they'd run it through Kareem most of the time by just dumping it in. And then maybe one guy would cut through. Maybe other times they would set some pin down, some like what we would call floppy action now was what everybody kind of ran. And so you'd have to be very skilled as a basketball player on the perimeter back then to be running away from the basket and make a catch and then pivot around and talk. There wasn't a lot of just catching it where you could now split and you can attack on the catch and break guys down. You had to be coming off of pin downs all the time.
NBA, in a lot of ways, was almost primitive, but you still had to be a coach. I mean, any coach in America with an IQ of at least 90 would have said, we're going to the big guy. And the whole story, and I don't think they'll get into the whole story. It's under the surface there, but the Lakers had this tremendous tension, and I mentioned this last week. You had this fabulous ability, this half-court weapon who now had all this help around him. You had this forward, Irvin Johnson, who was on his way to identifying solely as a point guard. And I have tracked his career at every step from the time he was a biddy. And so this was not a process that was complete, like, oh, he and Norm are going to fight over who's the point guard. Magic was a guy who wanted to help the team any way he could. Norm Nixon was Norm Nixon was a second year player who had been a killer rookie, and he had all this talent. But he's an advisor on this show, and he and Jerry West clashed a lot. And the basketball reality is that Jerry West was a great guard. And Jerry loves the game from the guard format. And he had other guards on that team before Magic got there that drove West crazy. But West was particularly hard on Norm Nixon. And Norm was this flashy, cocky rookie who was really good. And here come the Lakers. And when Magic comes and they become this sort of flexible, dynamic duo, it's not like it's one thing. It's one time it's Norm, one time it's Magic. It's all either Kareem or where they run, they get to run. But it's evolving, and they've got all these things. And it's sort of heaven for Jerry West. Magic is proven that, boy, he can really help with all this rebounding, and he just is such a great player. He just knows how to make things go. And then here's Norm. He's got this shot. He's feisty. He's cocky. He can't get to the basket. Like, he doesn't have this size that Magic Johnson had when he went end to end to get to the basket, or to break down the defense as he's going and make plays at high speed. But they became this fabulous tandem, and they won. Now, Magic's second year, he was injured, and the playoffs didn't go well. But they went to the NBA Finals twice in their first 3 years as a guard tandem.
Mm-hmm.
They won 2 championships in those first 3 years. They had the ultimate. There were problems, but they were sort of petty, silly stuff that you have on a lot of teams. But Jerry West was in a situation, for all intents and purposes, Bill Sharman was still the GM in 1981. Bill could hardly talk, though. Jerry Buss trusted him immensely. Bill, it's hard to describe Bill Sharman's great wisdom. He's in the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach. He's just incredible. But for all intents and purposes, from 1981 on, Jerry West was running that team. And West loved these guards. But the situation began to have a breakdown. There were cracks in the Norm Magic relationship, but they were buddies too. But Norm became a malcontent. He had to be warned by one of his friends to shut up. And in a lot of ways, this tension grew. And Jerry West told me in 2008, the hardest thing he ever had to do. Think about having a team that won 2 titles in 3 years, and suddenly you're going to make this move to trade Norm Nixon. But they got Byron Scott, who didn't have to have the ball in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
He provided the shooting, but you didn't have this constant tension over the ball. And Magic Johnson had evolved fully into that point guard and this incredible leader. And it is one of these things that you come to in life where you have to make a decision. And Jerry West was that agonizing guy in the Lakers, and he had to make that decision. And you think his losses to the Celtics haunt him? I assure you, trading Norm Nixon has haunted Jerry for years. He told me so. And it is it's a testament to him, but it's also just emblematic of the difficulty of basketball chemistry because it is always evolving, sometimes even within a game. And there are things about that team. I'm curious to see if they get into the real things about Showtime that are fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they will. It doesn't seem to be headed that way.
Right.
But then, to me, the amazing thing about studying, and I have worked. I'm 69 years old. I've been writing these books for now 40 years. The amount of work I have in this Magic Johnson thing, it's a huge mystery, all of this stuff. And it's important. Um, you're a repository in your website, a place where fans can go and study X's and O's. They come to a greater understanding of things. You're a heck of a coach, but you're a damn fine teacher. And, that upgrades basketball. Well, that's what most people who are writing seriously about this game. This off court stuff is not just something to do what you will so that you can get a quick laugh on an HBO show.
Hmm.
These are real people. They are the legends of the Lakers. Uh, the things that happen in their lives matter, and they're not perfect, but boy, they've done great things. And Jerry Buss is among them.
For sure. Well, wait. Let's get into a couple of things that happen in the actual episode. If we can tick some of those
Okay, I'm sorry.
off. Let's see here. We have okay. So the whole Jerry Tarkanian thing. So but first of all, they introduced Jack McKinney. So obviously, I would think by maybe next episode they're going to deal with that whole thing. So we'll have to put that on hold as far as how that insanity.
And this is, yeah, I'll just say real quickly, and I apologize for interrupting you. All of this is out of order and ridiculous. The way they've set this all up, none of this happened, any of this way. There are months between events. It had nothing to do, with Jerry West scouting, coming up with all this stuff about Jack. They've created this little drama, and none of it's reality.
Right. So, okay. So we'll keep focusing on this, the instances in specific. So, and by the way, I just want to point out, like the Norm Nixon character, I think might be the best character so far we have in terms of the success of him, of the character and how it's working. I think he's doing a terrific job of that, and I'm enjoying these scenes.
Well, the heroes in the scene that make themselves look good are people who don't like Jerry West. And
Right.
Norm is a great guy, has tremendous charisma, and that comes across. You're exactly right. There was never a one-on-one match with Magic, particularly at a white party. They're just trying to bring in all the crap that's bubbled up on the NBA landscape
Right.
in LA and just throw it into a thing and reconstruct it. Like, I guess it's the equivalent of Spam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got pork knuckles and all kinds of crap in here that.
And they clearly done their research. We mean they had the Obi doll where you're squeezing it and the eyes pop out. So that was fun because that was from my childhood. They had the handheld game that you play, the basketball game, the very 8-bit basketball game. The language, I think they're doing well as far as I remember from, I was 8 or 9 at the time, but like y'all are tripping jumped out at me as a thing that was not said back then. That seems later into the 80s or something.
No. Unfortunately, I have firsthand knowledge of this. I'm an East Coast kid, and the tripping became a thing in California in the 60s, but it had hit the East Coast the summer I graduated from high school. And very quickly, all the mannerisms of the drug culture were being articulated all over the United States. And the idea you're tripping was a phrase from probably 70, 71.
Oh, okay, good. Well, great, good. I kind of want to do a documentary on the history of the high five And that kind of plays into this as well, because someone did want a short one, and they wanted to make it seem like Dusty Baker did it at the Dodgers in like 1980. Like, it's that late.
I think it is.
Because we know we have the low five, which was what you'd see in the 70s, and like Slip Me Some Skin kind of.
Yeah, there was a lot, everybody was slapping skin. I mean, that was just a pickup ritual. It was, um, there are so many things culturally you can't even catalog.
Yeah.
All of the things that African Americans have contributed to our culture, at every level of every human endeavor. But in particular, in popular culture, they have provided often the essence of what it means to be American. And I just know this. I was 13 when the schools integrated in my part of Virginia. Now, it took years for that to happen. Magic Johnson's life was a big integration story in 75. But in 1965, schools integrated and the world changed. And it changed in amazing and wonderful ways. And the things we're discussing here are part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when culture went from really boring a lot of times. And I don't want to be, because there are all kinds of things that Caucasians do too that are, that are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, but I'm just saying it was such a profound thing. And I'm very thankful for that experience. And that's the American experience. How people like me were greeted with all kinds of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the African American culture was cool. That was what everybody gravitated towards. Now it's appropriated and whatever, but it becomes integrated too. And I would almost argue that, the pinnacle might have been disco. And it seems like, and I've done this in my political podcast, and we talked about that before, but I almost feel like the 60s and that era didn't end on New Year's Eve 1970. I think it ends at the death of disco in Chicago when they have, at Comiskey Park, they blow up all the different albums, because
the Bee Gees were a very different band. When I was a teenager, it was Mining Disaster and all these really good songs. Unfortunately, the appropriation of Black culture can really be a misfire. We see it a lot of places, but that also is a testament to the charm and the originality, everything about African American culture. But boy, that really blew up because the Bee Gees. Have you seen the documentary on the Bee Gees on HBO where they go in the studio and all this? They're locomotives themselves. They have all these hits, but that thing just sort of took on a life of its own, and in the process, killed disco. It was so successful, it just obliterated disco.
Well, the argument there, and this will be quick because we want to get back to the show, but the argument for me would be that the silent majority, quote unquote, decided they had enough of what disco represented, which,
they played the living crap out of that Bee Gees Saturday Night Fever album.
Right.
I was teaching high school at the time, so I know it was. I'm sorry. Go ahead. But
yeah. I mean, either way, and there's in the Bee Gees documentary, they discuss the destruction of disco. There needs to be a whole documentary just related on that little section they talk about. But nonetheless, the reason why you kind of bring it up too is because we do have a disco section of this show, of this episode, where they go to see the premiere of Fish That Saved Pittsburgh, which, by the way, there's a slander going on about Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. I mean, okay, listen, is it like the finest cinema ever made? No, but it is a really fun and good movie, and there's a lot of good comedy mined out of basketball, I think.
Well, there was always a slander toward basketball anyway.
Right.
And when you're going into 70s culture, first of all, the immense character assassination of the African American male is probably the most profound cultural story, I would say, of the 20th century, except it's been going on for four, 4 or 5 centuries now. I don't know, maybe or beyond that, perhaps. But it is profound, and a lot of things got caught up in that. And that film, yes, it's good. Ron Carter, I was just he was in that film, and of course he's very tight with Norm Nixon. They were both uh, young ball players in Pittsburgh together, and but I started writing basketball books when the saying was, the bigger the ball, the worse the book. And there was no basketball literature to speak of. There was. David Halberstam really changed things with breaks of the game.
Mhm.
And that was wonderful. But there was a lot of that character assassination in that. I write basketball books, my biographies, as Black Power stories. And it's not about, I mean, it's about basketball because that became an area, but it's really about all the business and marketing and global power accumulated by African American males coming out of um, a place, a culture that allowed them. I mean, nothing but. I mean, there just wasn't any sort of anything. And when we finally got moving pictures, we finally got all the majesty of cinema. What did they do? They used it to make the most vile, racist films, the most dishonest character assassinations possible about, and the early cinema was like, man, it had people walking around like penguins. They were just excited to go, and it was like magic. And so this character assassination has gone on so long. I'm sorry, I've gotten us off track, but this is why we really don't have an appreciation for films like that.
Right. So, and it was a great little scene though where we have Norm Nixon pissed off that they cut him out, which is like a perfect encapsulation of like what Hollywood is. You go there, he probably spent days and days and hours on set and all this stuff, and then they end up cutting you because it didn't work in the
Right.
editing. So that was wonderful.
And those are the touches that really could enhance if they'd done this. It's great to have Norm Nixon as a consultant, to hire his son as an actor in the thing. It's great to have, but don't use all what you're getting to make up stuff.
Wait,
And
is Norm Nixon's son playing Norm Nixon?
I think so. I know he's an actor in the film, and Norm is involved.
Okay, I didn't realize Norm Nixon's son was in it. I'll have to check that out and make sure, because that certainly, the guy playing Norm Nixon is doing a great job, and it makes me feel like that is Norm Nixon. So
right, and I think that they did hire his son to play him.
But I know that
I'm working very hard on my book. I stop and write, watch the thing each week. It takes me about 12 hours to settle down after I see it.
Right.
Because truth matters, facts matter.
Yeah.
They're fun. They're dramatic. This murder that shocked the viewers at the end of this is quite a story, but it's nothing like what they're doing. It's not. That's not.
Okay. The car was actually filmed. They went to the actual the hotel in North Hollywood that was there.
Well, they went to that. It was in a parking garage, and the reason the parking attendant finally found it, everybody's looking for this agent, and he's in the trunk of his Rolls Royce. This is 30 minutes after he leaves a meeting with Jack Kent Cooke and Jerry Buss. He's dead and already in the park. He's in a parking garage.
Right.
That didn't exactly look like a parking garage, and it certainly wasn't a setting where the attendant would smell the body.
Right.
But it was discovered. It's a complicated case. Now, here's one that will make your head ache. Vic Weiss, or Weiss, however you want to pronounce it.
We got to talk about that.
Yeah.
There's nobody named Vic Weiss when you spell it that way. As far as my bringing background, I was outraged. Why would they mispronounce someone's name who's Weiss? There's no. This guy clearly is. You say it Weiss, right? Like what is that? I can't. I don't even know why I want to spend time on it. But I wrote it all caps, question mark in my notes.
Yeah, they're either incredibly sloppy, which may explain, you know, when you have that much power in Hollywood and you make mistakes with, like you mentioned, the board for the NBA meeting last week. Sometimes you're just sloppy and in a rush. I don't know, and I'm not privy to that, so I can't explain. But Vic Weiss, uh, Jerry Tarkanian's childhood friend, but Vic Weiss is a boxing promoter. He likes to run around pretending like he's worth all this money and he's broke, and he's a gambler. He's a degenerate gambler, but Jerry Tarkanian is scared shitless of Vic Weiss, and this comes from one of their close friends who spent hours talking with me about this, and so what's really weird is that Vic Weiss was being watched because Carol Rosenblum, the owner of the LA Rams, was a bad egg. He was deep into the Vegas gamblers, deep into the mob in Vegas gambling. And Vic Weiss was the guy who would transport, today we can move funds around, but back then it was actually the briefcase, get on the airplane and take the money to Vegas. And Vic Weiss was one of those runners for Carol Rosenblum. 3 weeks before Vic Weiss winds up in the trunk of his car at the Universal City Sheraton parking garage, Carol Rosenblum was found floating in the surf in Florida under mysterious conditions. Now, nobody's ever been able to connect that, but you just start putting facts next to each other and you have to stop and reconsider things. You could do an entire movie, and I'm sure there will be, on the true story of Vic Weiss.
Huh.
But it is nothing like they're showing here,
Right.
except they got the body in the trunk. And that was a big shock for the viewer. And that's all they wanted. It's going to goose up their ratings.
Right.
But the real story is very complex.
Fair enough. In the book that Jeff Pearlman wrote, they intimate that he was skimming off the top when he's running the money. And he kept being warned over and over again. And after enough time, they don't warn you anymore, and you end up in the trunk of your car. So that seems as reasonable to me as any.
Sonny Vaccaro, who very close with both of these guys, and did his share of running himself in Vegas.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Roland? Let's see here. Maybe he'll unfreeze for us.
Am I back?
I hear you. So you're back. Great.
Okay. Sonny explained, and Sonny knows all the ins and outs. His brother is his longtime odds maker in Vegas. This is a world Sonny knows as well as basketball. And Sonny said, yeah, that's a convenient story, but there's no way the mob's going to allow Vic Weiss to handle any sizable amount or any money at all that of theirs. They're just not doing that. Now, it's hard. We're really into an area where separating fact from fiction is important. This is an unsolved murder. I will tell you. Well, I'll hold off on that. But there are additional facts, and it's fascinating what's going on here. And all this does is just give it short shrift, and they use it to goose the fans, but they're not ready to explain it in any relevant or important way.
Right. I will interrupt. We have a super chat, which is rare for this one, these kind of shows generally. But the Drew Show wanted to make sure that people understood. And thank you so much for doing the super chat. Very generous of you. He said, "No saying that the Fish That Say Pittsburgh is corny isn't character shade on African Americans. It's a corny B movie." So there must be a bit of a conversation in the comments right now about what Fish That Say Pittsburgh means to the community and to whether it's just a corny B movie. I mean, it is a corny B movie. I think it actually. It gave the sense it was cool then. I remember as a kid watching it and just loving it and just feeling like this was creative and something we hadn't seen before. You can watch it, by the way. I did watch it somewhat recently. I had to dig it down. Somebody might have uploaded it whatever on YouTube and the whole thing. I believe that's where you can find it, and unless it might have been even Vimeo or something, but it's out there. And you should give it a shot, give it a watch. I think people would like it.
I agree. And, I don't believe they showed the full title of the movie. They sort of had an odd angle where you saw the fish, but they really didn't discuss or really name the film completely there. It's just.
And by the way, for you, if you want to know what the plot of it is, so there's the Pittsburgh Pisces. The Pittsburgh. God, the question is, what was the name of the team before they changed it? I don't even remember. But they were wallowing around. They were not good. They all of a sudden it's not Gary Coleman. Is it Gary Coleman? No, it's not Gary Coleman. It's another kid. Gosh. Anyway, I'll have to look up the cast, but nonetheless, a kid of all people comes in here and says, "No, we should amass a bunch of the same astrological sign as Dr. J, as the main character as Moses in the show." And they do this, and they just start winning because all the signs align. And Soccer Channing is the what is she? She's like a fortune teller, right?
Right.
So it's insane. It's ridiculous. It's crazy, but it's still fun. And then it's also fun to see guys like Kareem on out there playing and other players. So it's only too bad they didn't make it a little bit later because Magic would have been in it, right? And he would have probably been amazing in it in whatever role they want to give him. So, but let's get back to really quickly. Okay, another quick question on my notes I had. When Jack McKinney introduces himself to Jerry West, and Jerry West goes, "Oh, you're Doc Ramsey's guy." Now, we all know that Dr. Jack Ramsey, that was his full title. But Doc Ramsey also was strange to me. I don't remember ever hearing anybody refer to him as Doc like that.
He was Dr. Jack. I'm sure if you're Dr. anything, you don't have to spend too much time around people before somebody's referring to you as Doc.
Okay.
Dr. Jack was just a force of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And he had debates. And this Dr. Jack explained this to me in interviews years ago. He had debates with his former assistant about whether Magic could be a point guard in the NBA. This was before, and he talked to me extensively about coaching against Magic during that rookie season. But I think that I don't trust any of this about Jerry West and this. I don't know what they're doing here, why they feel the need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
They've got this stuff so screwed up. You literally have to work hard. Here's a fact: the Lakers did hire Jack McKinney. After the Vic Weiss murder. There was no thought of hiring Jack. I mean, Jack McKinney wasn't in anybody's conversation. The truth is that in 1977, the Lakers were and Jack Kent Cooke were ready to hire. They're ready to hire Jerry Tarkanian. And Jerry Tarkanian backed out at the last minute in 1977. And Jerry explained to me, Jerry Tarkanian, that the reason he did so is that he was getting all this pressure from Vegas backers and he couldn't desert them. And of course, the implication is that's the mob. That's a cheap implication. He was getting a lot of pressure. He had a lot of success at UNLV. And the way Jerry West became coach of the Lakers, he and Jack Kent Cooke hated each other so much. And Jerry West felt that Jack Kent Cooke had cheated him. So Jerry West filed a lawsuit against Jack Kent Cooke and the Lakers. And the settlement of that lawsuit made Jerry West the coach of the Lakers. And that
Whoa.
is, yeah, that's all fact.
They should have put that in the show. That's interesting. That's more interesting than anything.
Yeah, but that would be if you're doing a cartoon, you can't do that. This is a cartoon. It for no good reason is it. And I spent a lot of time writing basketball. Basketball fans love true detail. They want to know the stories, all the little things, all of these. People say, why the hell are you going into Jerry West high school games? Because people want to know it. It's the rise of a person that, and the various events in their lives that happen. And I do that with the whole character of Kobe Bryant or Magic Johnson or Jerry West or Michael Jordan is revealed right there often in those high school games and the crazy shit that happens in those games a lot of times. And so, and things that happen in high school games come back and happen to great players later in their lives. Some of their most embarrassing moments for Jordan, for Magic Johnson, Jerry West have all been repeated in very public ways in the NBA.
Well, one thing we didn't really talk about yet is, okay, so a couple of things just to kind of the references of which we dug. We'd already talked about the Obi doll you squeeze, which was one of those fun things. We talked about, so y'all are tripping. Okay, was one thing they did say. Right on is another one he says a lot, which is right out of Shaft. So that's probably a good detail there.
I started hearing right on 1970.
Yeah, that's Shaft's big thing, and so that was good to hear that. And so they're doing a good job of some of the research. Now, Bus tells everybody that a mitzvah, it means it's good luck, which is completely wrong. A mitzvah is a good deed, but I don't know if that's McKay trying to be funny just because, I know part of his backstory, and he's, the Irish guy, whatever, but he's married to someone who's Jewish, so maybe he's just a joke to her or something like that. I don't know, because clearly he would know at this point what a mitzvah is. Now, the other thing is, the magic stuff, obviously they're not going to shy away from the sex. This is an HBO show. This is probably NSFW, if you to say that the right letters there, not suitable for work. But there's a lot of sex in this show, and they're obviously not going to shy away from the thing with Magic is funny. Magic almost gets entranced by this guy in the street outside of the
That's the most fraudulent of all.
Okay, so right, because here's the thing. I mean, he's a pimp. He's dressed like a pimp. Right, he's dressed like the most cliche '70s version of a pimp with the jacket, the fur coat, and the hat. I mean, I'm not sure by right at the end of 1979. I'm not really sure this is accurate, right? But they do want to make Magic come off as a little bit naive in this kind of situation there, I think,
Bullshit.
right?
He's not naive. He won't watch this because I don't think he wants his blood pressure to go up. But this is not who Magic was in any way in that regard.
Okay. Well, here we have another. Okay, so it's Drew show. So a super chat in case you.
In other words, Magic wasn't trafficking with a lot of prostitutes. Now, as it got into the NBA, you have to understand, particularly in the late 70s and then into the 80s, the number of women in hotels was thick. Now, among that group were all kinds of people, some of them prostitutes, but it wasn't like Magic somehow got his introduction like they're suggesting because he met this guy who was a pimp and, that suddenly he's in with all the prostitutes. That's not it.
Right. And the funny thing is he actually, I think, identifies where they are, where that house is. And I think it's like right near my house now.
Well, I'm not saying Magic. I mean, Magic, obviously, by his own account, was sleeping with 300 to 500 people a year, 300 to 500 women a year. And so just managing all that would require a small business.
Yeah, right. And yeah,
And so, but and an awful lot of Magic's women were regulars. And
okay.
when I say regulars, I don't mean um, I don't mean prostitutes. They were just people who wanted to have sex with basketball players.
Mhm.
Women aren't stupid at all. They're like anybody else. What was the song? Where the boys are, you go where the boys are, where the men are.
Mhm.
You know, and pro basketball having come through the '70s, and it was party. Pete Newell used to explain to me. The great Pete Newell talked to me long about his time as the GM of the Lakers in the late '70s, and he said all the hotels, the pot smoke was thick. You know, there was so much drugs. He said all these women, the players all passed them around, and the coke really set it off. And Pete Newell explained that he had to hire an off-duty LA vice detective to keep track of the players to make sure
Wow.
but you know, at one point there was a party in the late '70s by a couple of actors for a birthday party. I believe it was for Kareem, but it's for one of the players, and they had bowls of cocaine as party favors on the table, which was not unusual. That's throughout the '70s. Drugs were around as party favors at parties. This is no different than something you might see in any affluent area, stockbrokers, whatever. You know, we now have an idea that at the time basketball players were smeared with this behavior, but there's only a few basketball players, and there are lots and lots and lots of stockbrokers and business people and all sorts of people. And so it's a societal issue. It became something of an NBA issue, but
Mhm.
that's all another very complex story. But
Well,
it was part of that Lakers culture.
yeah, or yeah, the entire NBA. And so in case you don't know, a super chat is when someone actually donates money to get their chat up on the screen, which is what we do on our normal live shows. So the Drew Show wants to throw another one up there, so I feel obligated. We got to give a little love to him too. So thank you again. And he wants to say the nude scenes are over the top, Mr. Lazenby, like they are trying to make a point about Magic being a man's man or something. More nudity than GOT, Games of Thrones. Game of Thrones. Okay, so that's interesting because the Game of Thrones, obviously, if it's an HBO show, they want to have nudity. That's what HBO's thing is usually when they have the chance to. I get it.
They're all African American women in the show too, and that I don't know what's going on there because Magic was not a discriminatory person, and there have been many comments over the years, especially after he was diagnosed, that you know he would sometimes do a foursome with four different color groups. I you know I some of this stuff is just weird that they're doing in this
Yeah.
series
I mean, I
because
get it. I get it. They want to show that he, went to this place and he is, this is he's voracious, I suppose is the word. And that came across, and it came across in a way where they were able to show some women parts that would make it titillating, and that that was, I guess, fine with me. I understood what they were going with, and I don't think that necessarily is way out of
well,
the
you
reality.
know, actually they came on to Magic, uh, and I don't want to get into all this because it's in my book, but I have written before that before Magic got there, Norm Nixon was the guy that was, I mean, just moths to a flame, the female population. And actually, Magic began, and this part of it is somewhat accurate. You know, a lot of people in any situation will learn from the most successful, the veteran, and this is just one of those. But Norm was that guy. Eventually, Magic would be that guy and would live the life. But Norm Nixon was that guy.
Well, I think we covered everything we needed to cover for episode 3 and more. And what an
Right.
interesting conversation we had. So Roland, thanks for doing this again this week with me.
Coach, thank you for having me. I hope I was a little easier on your viewers this time. Some of them got a little upset, and I apologize. I've been pinned up with my book, working 7 days a week, sometimes 8, 10 hours a day. This is a complex story. It is an amazing story. I'll add one final thing. All of the things that the great athletes do, they have a lot going on in their personal lives. And it's always more amazing to me that they're able to do what they do, considering everything going on. And I think that maybe is something to think about when you look at this series.
For sure, and whatever the reality is, they're going to show us that behind the scenes. We're going to get some version of something, so they're dedicated to that, and we'll have to kind of have these shows in the future to make sure everyone understands what the reality was and get the record straight. So, thank you again, Roland, for coming on. Thank you, everybody out there. The Drew Show. Thanks for the super chats. It was a wonderful conversation. We're going to get into it more. I love the idea we can get into some sort of socio-political, economic era of the time discussion too. What the background there is too. So. Again, thanks, Roland, for coming on. Thank you guys for all being out there. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're on a channel. We're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Roland?
I am definitely in that.